The third category of tissues are muscle. So we did epithelial tissue and looked at the different varieties. We've gone through connective tissue and looked at the different types. Now we're on to the third category called muscle tissue. And under the heading of muscle tissue, there are three types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. What do they all have in common? Well, they're all made up of cells, primarily, known as myocytes. The cells are different between the three types, but they all have the common theme in that they can contract and relax. And that's due to proteins found in these cells. So they all three tissues contract and relax in order to move something. Skeletal muscle moves bones and skin. Cardiac muscle moves blood. And smooth muscle moves whatever's inside of the organ that it's found in. The shape of the cells vary. Looking at this drawing, this is a long, cylindrical shaped skeletal muscle cell. So long and cylindrical. When we get to cardiac muscle, those cells are more branched. And then when we get to smooth muscle, the cells kind of come to a point on each end. So the shape of the cell is different. Two types of muscle are called striated muscles. Striations are the altering light and dark bands that you can see inside of the cell. These are striations, or stripes, if you will. And we'll learn more about what forms these stripes when we get to the muscular system. So right now, it's not that big of a concern as to why skeletal and cardiac have stripes and smooth does not, but it could help you when determining what tissue is being discussed when you have to decide what tissue it is. So skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle are striated. Smooth muscle is not. What else is different? Well, the cells, like I mentioned, are all a little different. Skeletal muscle cells are long, cylindrical. They're usually multinucleated. So the cells are so long, they need more than one nucleus. So you'll find a bunch of nuclei within a single cell. And then finally, skeletal muscle is voluntary. We can consciously control our skeletal muscle. There's a few gray areas like the diaphragm. When you breathe, that's involuntary, but you can actually stop that muscle from contracting. You can hold your breath. You can actually speed up the contraction. You can hyperventilate. But skeletal muscle is voluntary. The last thing here is, where would you find it? You would find skeletal muscle attached to bones using tendons. You would find these muscles throughout the body, involved in motion, posture. They generate a lot of heat, and even some muscle offers protection, like your abdominal muscles. Next one is cardiac muscle. I think we know where it is. It's in the heart. Here's a picture of what the cells look like. They are more branched looking. They are striated. Where they attach with one another, there's a darker line there. That's going to tell you you're looking at cardiac muscle. You're going to see these dark lines called intercalated discs. Intercalated discs are found wherever you have cardiac muscle cells attached to one another. So the cells are branched, they're striated, usually one nucleus. Intercalated discs found at the connections, and the muscle contracts involuntarily. We do not have to consciously control our heart. Your heart's going to beat without you voluntarily doing it. The third type of muscle is smooth muscle. It's involuntary as well, so the organs that contain this muscle will contract and relax without your knowledge. It's non-striated. That's where it got its name, smooth. So you cannot see any kind of striping pattern within the tissue. This muscle is often found in hollow organs, but also in a few other locations. So a hollow organ is an organ that has some sort of internal lumen, and inside that lumen there might be something, like a blood vessel. A blood vessel is considered hollow, but it's filled with blood. Your airways are hollow, but filled with air. Your GI tract is hollow, but may or may not be filled with food. Your gallbladder is a hollow organ. It's filled with bile. Your urinary bladder is a hollow organ. It's filled with urine. So in the walls of hollow internal structures, you find a lot of smooth muscle. One exception is the iris. The iris of your eyes, the pigmented part of your eye, when you say, oh, I have green or I have blue eyes, that's a muscle. And that iris controls the pupil size, and that pupil lets the light in. So that's one organ that's not considered a hollow organ, but it does indeed have smooth muscle. There's another one that's attached to your hair follicles. So when you're nervous and scared and your hair stands up, that's an involuntary smooth muscle that causes your hair to stand up. We'll talk a little more about that when we get to the skin. So it really depends on what organ you're looking at as far as the function of smooth muscle. But if there's something in that organ and it's contracting and relaxing, it must help the movement of that material. It helps blood flow in a blood vessel. It helps air flow. It helps movement of food through the GI. It helps move urine out of the urinary bladder. And it helps to eject bile from the gallbladder. Okay, the last tissue. The last of the four major categories is nervous tissue, and thank God, there's no subcategories. Nervous tissue is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is made up of cells. The cells are neurons or nerve cells, or there's some sort of supporting cell called neuroglial cells. Neurons are neurons because they can produce action potentials. They can generate nerve impulses. That's what makes a neuron a neuron. And that transmits information throughout the body. We can get sensory information into the brain, or we can have the brain control something by sending out nerve impulses. The neuroglial cells we'll learn much more about when we get to the nervous system. They have some sort of supporting function. They help the neurons. But obviously, where would you find this tissue? You would find it in the brain, you would find it in the spinal cord, and you would find it in nerves, peripheral nerves, that are used to bring information into the CNS, central nervous system, or bring information out of the brain and spinal cord. So we'll learn much more about nervous tissue when we get to the nervous system. So that's the end of tissue. There's a lot of them. It's going to take time to work through them. Keep in mind, we're going to try to be able to identify the tissue using pictures. We're going to try to understand the function of that tissue, and we're going to try to remember where you would find that tissue.